Hello and welcome to a demonstration of Red Hat Migration Analytics version 1.0. If you're not familiar with the tool, it's essentially a set of tools that allows you to quickly analyze a VMware environment and produce a cost analysis or initial savings estimate for migrating that environment from VMware to a Red Hat platform. So what we've got here is the environment we're going to be doing the initial analysis on. It's a prepared environment for us, just a single cluster and a couple of hosts with about 14 VMs on it. CloudForms is the tool that's currently used to do this. In the future, I believe there will be a purpose-built tool for it, but for version 1.0, we're going to be using CloudForms version 5. And this is a brand new CloudForms environment that's just been prepared for this. So when you get the CloudForms appliance stood up, it's going to be kind of blank. There's not really going to be much to it. If you look in the, usually it'll kind of open up with the dashboard here. There's just no information here really. So we're going to start off by connecting CloudForms to vCenter. So we do that by going to Compute Infrastructure Providers and clicking on Add a Provider. And my browser remembers that I've done this before, so some of this stuff is just going to be kind of auto-populated, save us a little bit of time. And so what we're doing is essentially we're going to name a new provider, the type VMware vCenter. We're going to be connecting to this vCenter I showed you over here. And let's see, vcenter.example.com, and administrator at vsphere.local, and the password for administrator.vsphere.local. The first step is that we're going to validate that CloudForms can talk to vCenter. So we put in the credentials, and if we get green, then we're good. So we're going to go ahead and add our provider. When CloudForms adds the new provider, it starts to interrogate it. So it logs into the provider and it asks for a list of inventory, and it starts to build its VMDB with information about that provider. In a little bit here, we should be able to click on this and see. Right now, we're showing 0 on everything. In just a minute or so, that's going to be populated with some other information. While we're waiting for that, we're going to kind of look at the appliance itself. So I've got a command line session that's opened to this CloudForms appliance that we're on right now. And there are two different types of analysis that we can perform. There's kind of a basic scan, a basic migration analysis, and then there's a more detailed introspective analysis. The basic scan is going to pull information that you can see from VMware, from vCenter. This would be lists of hosts, how much memory and CPU and disk that each VM is taking up, how many VMs there are, how many networks, that kind of information. The more detailed complete scan requires something that CloudForms performs called smart state analysis, but that requires a little bit of setup. So the way that smart state analysis works is that CloudForms causes VMware to take a temporary snapshot of the VM, and it scans that snapshot of the VM for information getting down into like the file level. So we can actually look and see if a file is present on a VM or if there are contents in that file that we're looking for. This helps us to identify that something is one type of workload versus another. So right now we're going to just kind of check. I'm not going to go through the whole process, but one of the foundational pieces of this is something called the VDDK, which is a driver that's available from VMware. You have to log into VMware with your own account to get it. We don't distribute it with CloudForms. But it's a driver that you'll install into CloudForms that allows it to talk directly to virtual disks from VMware. So what I'm doing right now is I'm running the command that's usually the last thing that you run when you install the VDDK. And that checks to make sure that the driver is installed in CloudForms properly. And that's the response that I was looking for. So we're all good there. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull in a default profile for smart state analysis. This is something that we've prepared out on GitHub, and I'm just going to pull this in. CloudForms does not ship with a default profile. The profile essentially tells it what to look for when it scans the VM. So we have one very specifically tailored for the migration analytics purposes. So after we bring that in, we're gonna pull that into the CloudForms database real quick, and I'm just kind of let that cook. We're gonna refresh this page, and we should have information here very shortly. Yep. So we've got the 3 data stores, 2 hosts, 14 VMs. Our next step is going to be with the hosts themselves, because the way that smart state analysis works is that the CloudForms appliance reaches out to and talks directly to the VMware host rather than going through vCenter. This allows it to directly access the snapshotted disk so that we can do the inspection. So I'm going to come in here and select both of our 2 hosts, and we're going to edit the configuration here, and we're going to add some login information. So right now, we're just going to be using a root password to log in. And we need to select, it doesn't really matter which one because they both have the same username and password, but you select a host to validate against. And this tells us that CloudForms is able to reach out and talk to that host. So we're going to go ahead and save this credential. And our next step is going to be to come over here to this gear icon, and we're going to turn on a role for the appliance called Smart Proxy. And this just tells it that it tells this appliance that it's your job to look for or to perform smart state analysis on the provider that's attached to the zone that you're in. So now that we've added that, we're going to assign a policy to the provider. So we have to go back to Compute Infrastructure Providers. We'll click on our vCenter provider, and we're going to go to Policy and Manage Policies. So we have this VM Smart State Analysis Profile policy here. We're going to apply this. If you open it back up and look at it, so we've got the policy applied here. Now, one important thing to note about smart state analysis is that smart state analysis is not something that you want to run on everything. It can take a lot of time to complete, and it can also result in disruption of services on certain types of workloads, like databases or stateful databases, particular like Microsoft Exchange, for example. So if you had any of those, what we'd want to do is to come back into the vCenter and look at the VMs, and we're going to select, there's lots of different ways that you can search for these and select them, but what I'm going to do is, just for the sake of this demonstration, I'm going to take this cluster here, and I'm going to tell CloudForms not to perform smart state analysis on it. So the way that we do that is, again, by going into policy, and what we're going to do is edit the tags for these. We have a tag category called exclusions and do not analyze. So when we apply that to these, it tells us that even though the policy has been applied to the entire provider, the whole vCenter, it needs to skip those VMs and not try to perform smart state analysis on them. So the next thing that we need to do is to enable the menu. If we look under migration, right now we have migration plans, infrastructure mapping, and migration settings. And these are for performing the actual migration themselves with CloudForms. If we want to perform migration analytics, we have to make a new setting change here. So we come in and go to the this gear icon here, and under the settings accordion, we're going to drill down into, and this is actually the CloudForms appliance. This is how it shows up in here. It's going to have an advanced tab. Now this If you're doing this on an environment that has multiple CloudForms appliances installed in a region, you want to perform this on the user interface appliance, the one that you're actually logging into. And consequently, the only one that you'll be able to see this advanced tab for is the one that you happen to be logged in. If there was multiple appliances, you'd see a whole list of them here, but only the one that says current on it is the one that you're going to be able to get into these advanced settings for. So what we're going to look for, I'm just going to use my Control F here to find it, and we're going to look for migration analytics. Oh, and it's right there. So right now it's enabled false. We're going to set that to true. Take this warning very seriously here. If you start messing around with stuff in here and you don't know what you're doing, you type something wrong, it can cause the appliance to be unresponsive. But we're just going to make this real quick change here. We're going to save it. And then what we have to do is to restart the CloudForms EVM service. CloudForms has been restarted and I have logged back in. So all of our settings should be there. We can confirm this by looking at migration, and now we see we have a migration analytics option. One thing before we do this, I just wanted to kind of explain how to set off a smart state analysis. So we're going to drill back into compute infrastructure providers, and we're going to look at VMware or vSphere. We're going to click on these 14 VMs here, and just to keep things simple, I'm going to select all of them. I'm going to go to configuration and perform smart state analysis. And so again, the smart state analysis sort of enriches the information that we have for each given VM. So it can take some time depending on the size of the VM and the complexity of it and how many that you're trying to do. Just real quick here, you can see that we've initiated the scan process for all of those VMs, and as you can tell, the cluster VMs are not listed among the ones that we have requested. All right, so again, I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to come back when this is finished, and then we're going to walk through the process of creating the payload that we're going to upload. Okay, so all of the scans have finished, or at least they've tried to. We did have one that we ran into a problem with. Not really a showstopper here because we don't expect to get 100%. This is really kind of about estimating cost, and I don't anticipate that this FreeBSD machine not being able to be scanned is going to have much of an impact. So now that we've got all that data into CloudForms, we're going to come over to Migration Analytics, and we're going to click Get Started. So we can see the number of VMware providers, gives us a nice little summary here. This is going to be a summary of everything that's connected to CloudForms, so we could potentially have more of that than that connected, and then it'll break it down by individuals. Right now, because we have one provider, these numbers are going to match. So we're going to click Collect Inventory Data, and we can, earlier when I was describing the process, I mentioned that there are two different types of scans that we can do. We can collect basic data, which is the high-level information, including number of VMs and hypervisors. This gives you kind of a better explanation of how that works. But because we went through all the trouble to set up smart state analysis, we're going to go ahead and hit detailed. Just know, though, that because we have this option for basic data, you can opt not to do those extra steps and still get some decent information. Definitely, you can still get enough to do an initial savings estimation. So we get to come up here and select which provider. If we had multiple providers, they would be in there by name. So we're going to select the detailed data, and we're going to hit continue. And this is going to cook just for a little while it tries to pull in all that information. It's going to create this payload file, which right now it's being dropped onto the file system on CloudForms. So there's a manual process for copying that out to your machine so that you can upload it. For right now, though, we're going to skip that and through the magic of prepared data, we're going to just jump right over into our cloud.redhat.com. And this is going to be, we're actually going to go to the beta site for right now because that's where this demo is prepared for. So we're going to sign in. The customers will sign in with their own accounts, obviously. And we're going to come down into Migration Services and click on Migration Analytics. Now, right now, my account doesn't have any migration analytics in it, so we're going to get this blank Get Started page here. So I'm going to click on Get Started, and it's going to ask me for that inventory file. Well, that inventory file that we generated, because it's kind of a small environment, it's not really indicative of what a real migration analytics output from a real environment would be. You're going to see a lot of skewing in the numbers because the environment's so small. So we're going to try to give you some better data here, to a better example set here, so that we can analyze it. So we're going to open this up, and we can give this a special name here, whatever helps to keep it differentiated, whatever helps the customer to identify it. We've designed the process so that it can be the customer performing these steps. It's also possible that that a representative from Red Hat could do this at their site too. So these little bits of data here are kind of interesting. You're going to be calculating or estimating growth, and the customer has the option to change this. Also, because migration is a long-term process, you can get statistics on how long it would take to do this over the course of 3 years. We estimate that the migration shouldn't take longer than that. It's possible these numbers need to all add up to 100%, but it's quite possible for a customer to, if they decided that they were going to migrate everything within 1 year, if they want to see statistics for that, they can change this first year one to 100% and just leave the other two blank, and that'll give them the information. So we're going to click on Create Report. It's going to upload the data, and it's going to apply its analytics to it. It's going to take a little while here to analyze the file that we uploaded. So we're just going to let that cook for a minute. Okay, so the report has been analyzed, and we can take a look at it now. So we're going to click on this to open it up. And as you can see, the very first most prominent thing that pops up here is going to be that initial savings estimate. And this is really kind of a big part of this. I want to kind of to add some texture to that. The initial savings estimate is what we believe that you would save over the course of 3 years migrating your workloads, rehosting them from VMware to a Red Hat platform. This means that the VMs themselves stay exactly the same as they are. No changes are made to them. They used to be hosted in VMware, and now they're hosted on Rev, or now they're hosted on OpenStack. The reason that I bring that up is because there are additional opportunities that can be identified by this data to bring even more efficiency into this. So this isn't counting things like application migration, where the application is refactored and put into a container platform, for example. And there are going to be, with the ability to do introspection on these VMs, we can identify workloads that are particularly suited to that kind of thing and call them out. So if we click on the workload migration summary, I believe it's in here. So this is another kind of analysis here. So the target recommendations say that 100% of these could run on Rev. 83% of them we think would be good candidates for OpenStack, and 24% of them are workloads that are running on a non-Red Hat platform that could be migrated to a Red Hat platform. So we can also take a look at the inventory, and you can drill down into every single virtual machine that is part of this analysis. So we can open these up a little bit and take a look at them, and you can see where we're getting the numbers that we're getting. It's not going to allow you necessarily to work all the way backwards, but it gives you an idea of what we analyzed, so the customer can go back to it and use it for reference. Another thing I really like about this report that I find very helpful is this part right here, where we also factor in the cost of training, consulting, and even the travel and lodging for the consultants separately. And this is kind of a really big deal because when a customer's looking at this, if we just came to them and said it's going to be this much less to run this platform on Red Hat, that's part of the conversation. That's the subscription part of the conversation. If our subscriptions are more cost effective than VMware subscriptions, that's great. But it's almost a hidden cost if you're not upfront with the actual cost of the transition. So we factored in consulting services, and still, with consulting services factored in, reached this number as the savings estimation. And again, remember that's just a starting point. So we've got 288K for consulting and 28K for training, because we expect that your VMware administrators are going to be taking in or taking up the new Red Hat platforms and administering them. So as you can see, we've got a very nice high-level estimation that's available very, very quickly. And that's the end of our demo for the Red Hat Migration Analytics platform.